Palmyra Orphanage is a first-person horror game where you explore the eponymous orphanage to find out what happened to your brother. Atmosphere. The game's darkness and extremely limiting light source makes stumbling around in the pitch-black rooms completely nerve-wracking. For some areas you can't see anything until it's right in front of you. There's a lot of tension in waiting to see what's going to jump out of the darkness. There's an eerie quietness over most of the game that only lays on the apprehension as you explore the derelict-looking buildings. Reading notes and seeing the level of abandonment of child's played areas, upturned cots, and stories of how the place fell into disuse are fairly depressing too. Overall, the atmosphere is a solid base. It's not overwhelming, but keeps the player on their toes. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. There's a lot of jump scares that have been used to death by this point, with things flashing in front of you and sudden loud noises to startle you. There's a few pseudo-psychological effects like layers of fear-style static cuts that move your position or rearrange the environment around you. The main enemy of the game appears too infrequently and they aren't that threatening. Whilst these things are no doubt effective in startling the player, it's a very lazy way of making a horror game that I've seen way too often at this point. There are a few genuinely frightening moments that don't feel overused or cheap, but sadly they are vastly outnumbered. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The soundtrack was a series of very understated metallic ambient tones that laid low in the background, allowing the player to soak up the eerie quietness of the game, which was really nice. The sound effects were pretty realistic, but they weren't really anything special. There was some kind of problem with the directional audio that left me stumped in places. You could hear noises in the distance, but it was extremely difficult to pinpoint where it was, or in what direction the enemy was approaching you from, which may have actually made the game more frightening, so I have to approve. That's two Harry Masons. Gore. There was a lot of blood, with the walls being splattered in it, blood trails leading off to specific areas, blood filling the swimming pools and pouring out of taps. It felt pretty excessive, and even if it was there to symbolize parts of the story, the sheer amount of it was kind of needless and out of place. That's still two Harry Masons. Story. Returning to your childhood orphanage to find out what happened to your brother leads you to discover disturbing things about what happened at the orphanage. With the time period set after the demise of the Soviet Union and Russia, is an extremely bleak and depraved tale of people being forced to make horrific choices. The story is mostly told through diary entries in specific rooms to give things context, but they make sure you understand the story by weirdly retelling the whole thing in the last 10 minutes of the game, and provide you a multiple choice ending. The retelling felt tacked on and needless, but the overall story itself is still pretty interesting, making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. For an hour or so of gameplay, it's extremely well made, if not a little bit underwhelming. Visually it's fantastic, but doesn't provide anything deeper than a few jump scares in a series of dark rooms. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I cursed the darkness, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.